band Nokturnal Mortum are a symphonic black metal band and even a pagan black metal band. But more importantly, as they stand, they are my favorite black metal band of all time at this point in time. Every single thing they have released has been amazing, save maybe a few moments that have been okay or iffy, but their albums are absolutely amazing. And they're not even really an acquired taste for the most part. Their stuff is actually very easy to get into, especially if you're trying to get into black metal. This would actually be a band I would probably recommend even starting with. So this band not only does incredible quality, but they have amazing consistency and absolutely stunning creativity. A lot of the original members of Nokturnal Mortum came from a band known as Separation. Then they formed a band called Crystalline Darkness, and then they formed Nokturnal Mortum, originally spelt with a C instead of a K. This lineup included our main guy, Vargoth, who was on guitars and vocals. You had Monarthriel or something like that on drums, Satroth on keyboards, Warthrax on guitars, and Quarkoth or something like that on bass. And at this time they started working on their first demo known as Twilightfall. But for some reason the whole original tape was destroyed and they have to re-record the whole damn thing. And then during this time they decided to change the band name to Nokturnal Mortum with a K. And then our favorite band from Ukraine released its debut. Even though the first two releases are demos, every Nokturnal Mortum fan argues that these are pretty much just albums, but they didn't have enough money to release them as full releases. But they do sound well enough produced to be an album. So let's start with their most different release, Twilightfall, a melodic death metal album. In 1995, they released this demo, Twilightfall, and it is not only their most different album, but it's a very, very different album, even for the time. Hardly any album really sounds like this. But even though it's so unique and so awesome, the one thing that really irks me about this and just annoys me to no end and makes me laugh my ass off when I hear this album is the drums. Now, it cites that there was a drummer on this album, and they say all the time that there was a drummer on this album, but just listen to the fast parts in this album. It sounds like a terrible drum machine, especially when you go to the ride. I just start laughing my ass off. But aside from that, like I said, the music and performances are so amazing. I especially love the clean vocals that they show off a lot on this album. It gives a very cool gothic vibe to it. But this album is equipped with a lot of excellent thrashy riffs, especially on my favorite song on here, The Crying of Ukraine. Melody check, riffs check, death metal check. It's everything you could want from a 90s extreme album as long as you are into the whole melodic thing. But you just gotta get past those horrific drums. Then the band decides to completely change their sound, and in 1996, they go to black metal with one of their most iconic releases ever. The second of their two demos, which should be considered full-on releases, we have the incredible Lunar Poetry. Even though it was a demo, 1996's Lunar Poetry was distributed all over, not even Ukraine, but along that whole area of Europe, and it actually got them a lot of attention. It was a very unique sounding demo. It was black metal mixed with a lot of symphonics and melody. The riffs are much better on this, the performances are better. Vargoth's vocals go black metal, and he does an excellent job on this album. A lot of the songs have very cool, sinister intros that have a lot of really creepy, even though bad sounding, but scary sounding keyboards. The band is known to have incredible atmosphere on all their albums, but this one is one of their best. It has a very creepy, blizzardy forest vibe to it. But speaking of little instrumental scary bits, there's a cool little instrumental on the album known as The Grief of Vorenia or something like that. And it's just weird drum and keyboard shit, but it's really catchy and memorable. There's a lot of cool, odd time signatures to it, and even though I usually hate songs like this, I think this one's really cool. Now there's some really amazing songs in here like Ancient Nation and Winter Becomes, Lunar Poetry, of course. I tend to find a lot of the better songs in this album are on the first half, especially a song that they'll re-record later for Nechrist known as Prune's Celestial Silver, which is a really cool, lengthy song. But my favorite song on here has to be the kick-ass riff-oriented Carpathian Mysteries. One more thing before we go on is that there's another interesting song in here that's a cover of a Celtic Frost song known as Sorrows of the Moon, and it's probably the weakest song on here. They definitely do it a lot better than Celtic Frost did, and it's still decent, but I feel like this is one of those few moments the band has that's kind of pointless. They really could have just cut this off the whole thing, and it honestly feels like it's just a shitty bonus track. Then Warthrax leaves, who was originally the lead guitarist, and they replace him from another guy from the band Crystalline Darkness known as Carpath. And then a guy named Satarius or something like that joins Nokturnal Mortum as, get this, another keyboardist. So not only do they have two guitars, but this band for some reason decided to do two keyboards. Usually something like that is completely overkill, but 1997's Goat Horns threw all that stupid idea of having too many band members, especially too many keyboards, on one album completely out the window, because 1997's Goat Horns is not only just a black metal masterpiece and one of their best albums by far, it proves that symphonic black metal, something that I absolutely hate, can be done and make black metal itself look inferior in comparison. This one was finally released as an actual full-on official release as opposed to a demo. And like I said, even though the other stuff was released as demos, they sound about the same quality as this. So I still don't get why they didn't just professionally release them, but whatever, it doesn't matter. This album has a very dank and dingy sound to it, and I absolutely love that. Everything is kind of low in the mix, but both keyboardists are going apeshit. One of the keyboardists focuses on some of the more lead stuff and folksy arrangements, which is especially shown off on the second to last track on here, Koledia, or something like that, which shows a lot of really, really weird Ukrainian folksy parts that he does on the keyboards, and it doesn't honestly sound like a keyboard doing it. And this Ukrainian folk instrument and keyboard battle is what makes Nokturnal Mortum from this point on so creative, so unique, and so amazing. The album starts and ends with some really cool little instrumentals, and usually I absolutely hate intros and outros to album because they're always wind-blowing or absolutely boring, pointless shit. But the overture, which is the beginning of the album, Black Moon Overture, shows a lot of really awesome, crazy keyboard dynamics between the two keyboardists. And then Eternal Circle, which is the last instrumental, is a really cool build-up. Has some really creepy vibes going on there. Now, every other song is extremely long, extremely progressive, extremely well-written, and the instrumentation and musicianship is absolutely on top form. But I gotta say, even though all the middle songs are just about equally good, there is one standout. The longest song on here, the one that has the best, most catchy parts of the whole album, the best riffs, the best melodies. We're talking about the longest song on here, Vele Scrolls. And finally, Nokturnal Mortum on one of the releases scores what I would give an absolute 10 out of 10. If you want probably the best beginner album, their most unique, cool album, I'd probably maybe recommend this one if you're a black metal listener. I'd probably say it's my second favorite album, we'll get to why later, but of their black metal stuff, their symphonic black metal stuff, yeah, this is the album. And then in 1990, Nokturnal Mortum plays their Emperor card, an album that sounds very similar to Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk, but Nokturnal Mortum makes an album that I argue is probably better in many regards. An album that is simply their heaviest, most blistering album. And they decide to change from a extremely melodic, laid-back approach on goat horns to something that can only be described as wretched, evil, extremely heavy, relentless. And on their next album, in 1998, they go to the gates of Blasphemous fire. In many ways, this is one of my favorite albums from the band because it is so different. It is so ridiculously heavy. And I'd say if you're into more extremely heavy black metal, or if you're really, really into like Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk, like heavy symphonic stuff, check this one out. Because every song on here is really, really awesome except for one. And we'll talk about that right now. There's an instrumental song on here known as Cheramash. That is so pointless, it baffles my mind. It's 6 minutes of going absolutely nowhere. But other than that, everything is absolutely amazing. The whole first half of the album is relentless black metal. You hardly hear keyboards, which I think is actually good compared to the last album, which was very keyboard oriented. This one's extremely guitar and drum oriented. Vargoth's vocals, I think, are probably his absolute best on this album as well. But for some reason, this album is kind of considered a weaker album from the band, and usually considered their weakest release. I don't understand, because I think it is just so awesome. I think it deserves more praise and credit than it gets. And some of my favorite songs are on here even. Like my favorite song the band has ever written, the song that you've heard in the intro, The Forgotten Ages of Victory. One of the best black metal songs ever conceived that has such a great, catchy, awesome fist-pumping melody to it. But the other amazing song in here is the epic song, the 13th Asbath Celebration. And To the Gates of Blasphemous Fire effectively puts us in the middle period of the band, with two albums that the fan base for some reason considers weaker efforts of the band. But these two albums would be pretty much the end of the black metal era for the band. And because they went more conventional To the Gates of Blasphemous Fire, they decided to go completely batshit insane and very different on the next album. Because in 1999, Vargoth becomes the only guitarist in the band, still equipped with two keyboardists. The whole band decides to release their most controversial and their most weird out there album ever. An album that's translated to Nechrist. Once again, we have a 10 out of 10 album, ladies and gentlemen, one that's very different. Production-wise, it sounds extremely weird. It sounds very wretched. The guitar sounds especially. The bass sounds all slimy. And the keyboards and folk arrangements are a little more down the mix once again, but they sound all weird too. So the production can only be described as absolutely wretched. But that only works to help this album, especially on songs like The Funeral Wind Born in Oriania or something like that. The black metal arrangements are absolutely fantastic. In some ways sound heavier than The Gates of Blasphemous Fire because it sounds more like, wow, this is kind of like a Dark Throne crazy sound. But then all of a sudden the folk arrangements come in to remind you this is Nokturnal Mortum, and this is one of the most weird albums ever. Seriously, that little folksy breakdown that sounds like a little hoedown is probably the weirdest moment in this band's whole discography. And if any other band, especially a black metal band, were to do something like this, I would probably hate it. But this band loves to break boundaries in what I consider good and bad because I love this weird shit. There's so many other amazing, awesome songs in here that go in different places. Songs like Black Raven, The Child's Swamps Full of Moon, and Nechrist, The Dance of Swords, are more keyboard, goat horn style, However, you have a lot of really heavy, badass songs like in the style To the Gates of Blasphemous Fire, but focus more on the riffs, more so probably than ever. Stuff like Night Before the Fight, which is one of my favorites on here, and Death Damnation, which even has little crazy bass lines all over it. And I mentioned before that they also re-recorded a song from Lunar Poetry on this album, Prin's Celestial Silver, and I actually kind of like this version a little bit more. But it's time to talk about the controversy. Why a lot of people, especially on Metal Archives, like to shit on this album for the most retarded reason you could possibly imagine. Now, like I said, it is controversial and all, but a lot of reviews on Metal Archives, the cesspool of autism, tend to bash the album for unknown reasons, then talk about how it's somehow anti-Semitic, and then lazily say how everything else is terrible because of it. But it mostly seems that the only reason they don't like this album is because of the song The Call of the Aryan Spirit, which is actually probably one of the best songs of the whole album. But this song got them the stupid label that does not make any sense with this band, National Socialist Black Metal, which in and itself is the most retarded, pointless genre ever. That's like making a genre called pirate metal or ninja metal. Just because it has lyrics about something doesn't mean that they are somehow a new genre. And it's only one song, and I have no idea how this was such a huge controversy, because I mean it is about how Judaism is bad and shit, but they also make a song called Jesus Blood on here, which is doing the same thing except with Christianity. So it seems very hypocritical how it's somehow okay for them to make the song Jesus Blood, but all of a sudden call the Aryan Spirit, oh, that's taking it too far. That's just too far. Like I said, another masterpiece from the band, and don't be a pussy that's just going to get scared away because of some political themes that they had on the song. Then in 2000, the drummer Monthrel or something like that leaves the band. And because he was buddies with him, Satarius or something like that leaves with him as well. And at the same time, they're having problems with record labels, and they were trying to get out of the contract with Nuclear Blast and all this crazy shit. Then they get this guy named Vrolok or something like that from the band Ruins of Dienshit or something like that, and he joins Nokturnal Mortum as the second guitarist. And then conveniently, Munrathal or something like that and Satarius or something like that returned to the band. And then 2002, they started working on their follow-up album, which enters us into the third era of the band, the modern era, where they decided to get away from black metal and start dabbling more into pagan Viking metal and other cool different ideas. But it still sounds within the same realm of what they've already done, showing that this band loves to progress and evolve, along with the fan base, releasing incredible stuff no matter what they did. And then during this time, Zarquath or something like that, who was the original bass player, leaves, and then the second guitarist, Vrolok, or something like that, decides to do the bass instead of guitar. And then this guy named Alzeth, who was in Hate Forest, decides to join the band as the second guitarist. And then we get a new drummer, a guy named April Odolv or something like that, from Ruins of Denshet or something like that. Then they decided to release a pointless EP of demo recordings from the new album, and they released it as Taste of Victory. Don't check it out, it's pointless. It's basically just all the good stuff from the next album. And the new album they're recording is actually recorded in an English version and then in a Russian/Ukraine version. But the release of both these versions was pushed back all the way to 2005, and they finally released their new album, a very, very Viking metal inspired album that has a lot of crazy folk elements to it. An album that's called Weltschung, something like that, but translated to something that isn't gibberish, Worldview. Now, Worldview is actually one of my least favorite albums from them, which is going to be crazy to a lot of people. A lot of fans hold this as one of their best albums. The reason for that, though, is even though all the main songs on here, all the long songs are really awesome, I feel The Breath of Ragnarok, Weltschung or something like that, Hailed Be the Heroes, The New Era of Swords, The Knots Upon the Thread of Fate, and The Taste of Victory are all awesome songs. The rest of it is a bunch of annoying little instrumentals that go nowhere and irritate the shit out of me, making the whole thing 75 minutes when it could have been cut down to maybe even like 60 or so. But that's just a nitpick because the rest of the stuff on this thing is so damn good. Hailed Be the Heroes is such a really bizarre song though, one of the weirdest things they've ever done because it kind of sounds like American country music with all the crazy folk arrangements. But of all the amazing Viking metal style songs in this album, the absolute best one is The New Era of Swords. One of the best songs the band has ever done. But even though they just released the album, they already started making some new songs for the next album. Stuff that had been released on Voice of Steel known as Valkyrie in Ukraine. Then in 2007, Alzeth or something like that decided to leave. And then a guy named Arstgar or something like that from the band Elder Blood and Veil of Sin decides to join as the new second guitarist. And then 2009, Odalov or something like that leaves, and we have a guy named Baroth or something like that becomes a new drummer of Nokturnal Mortum. God, these lineup changes and crazy gibberish names are giving me a headache. And then in 2009, the band decides to release their magnum opus, an album that they've been working on for years before this point, perfecting every single moment on this album, making every single song almost like its own amazing, magical, progressive, well-written, extremely creative and unique statement. We have not only their best album, but one of the absolute most incredible albums ever released. An album that even trumps Blood, Fire, Death as being one of the most well-written black metal, Viking metal releases ever. We have the masterpiece, Voice of Steel. On this album, Nokturnal Mortum threw a real big curveball. They decided to change their sound, and once again, for a band that decides to go a direction of something that I would absolutely otherwise hate, Nokturnal Mortum once again smashes through all stereotypes of extreme metal music and expanded the hell out of their sound on the best album they've ever released and easily one of the best albums ever made. Even though there are very, very few moments that are even really black metal, it makes up for it by transcending it into the best of other genres. This album shows off anything that you could possibly want, which makes me actually recommend this maybe as being the first album you should check out by them. If you don't like black metal or even really extreme metal, The Voice of Steel is where you start off with. It does everything that I hate about extreme metal music. It makes it work, like I said. And each song goes in such a drastic different direction that each song feels like their own album. The first song, Voice of Steel, is an incredible Viking metal song. See Valkyrie if you want some amazing black metal. See the song Ukraina for some really catchy power metal tendencies. Prog mixed with black metal, and Slave proves that shit's garbage, but somehow on the song Islands of My Dream, they prove me dead ass wrong. Want an old school folk song? Well, look no further than The Sky of Sorrowful Nights. And how about some ambient, dare I say even techno tendencies? Well, it all comes together on the last on the album, White Tower. And as if this album couldn't get any better, we have to talk about one more song, my favorite song on the album, that is jam-packed with incredible amounts of energy. My favorite song is By the Way of the Sun. Honestly, I don't think the band can outdo themselves on this one. This is absolutely the apex, and even set a new standard for what black metal and extreme metal and even music can do.